The air was thick with tension as Detective Kate Roberts, her face set with grim determination, approached the dilapidated house at the edge of town. A dark shadow loomed in the doorway. Inside, a child's desperate cries echoed through the cracked walls. The police had just received a tip a child was locked away, trapped in a nightmare. But the danger was far from over. Outside, a man Robert Harrison stood at the heart of it all, a wealthy businessman with a past cloaked in secrecy, and for once, it wasn't money or power he feared, it was the truth. "Max, let's go," Kate said, glancing down at her canine partner. Max, a loyal and fierce German shepherd, was ready for the hunt. This wasn't just another case. This was personal. The day had begun like any other, with the routine hum of the morning bustle. But within an hour, everything changed. Kate Roberts had always trusted her gut, and today it was telling her that something wasn't right. A confidential informant had reached out, claiming to know about a child who was being kept in a house under terrible circumstances. The details were vague to vague, but something in Kate's instincts told her it was real. She had worked in law enforcement for over a decade, and in that time, she'd seen it all. Drug dealers, thieves, murderers, but nothing had prepared her for the dark world of child abuse and neglect she was about to uncover. As she drove her patrol car through the quiet streets of the suburban neighborhood, her mind raced. What kind of person would hide a child in their own home? A parent? A relative? The possibilities made her stomach turn. Max, her canine partner, sat beside her, his eyes calm and observant. He'd been by her side through countless cases, his unshakable loyalty a comforting constant in an often unpredictable world. Together, they were an unstoppable team. Kate parked the car and stepped out, feeling the weight of the moment. As she walked up the cracked concrete path leading to the front door of the house, she could already hear the faint sound of a child's sobs echoing through the thin walls. Every part of her screamed to rush inside, but she knew better. Patience was key. The house was eerily quiet. The front yard was overgrown with weeds, the paint on the front door peeling away like old memories. It looked abandoned, as if no one had lived here for years. But the cries of a child made it impossible to ignore. Max let out a low growl as he stood beside her, ears perked, sensing the tension in the air. Kate knelt beside him, whispering, "We're going in, boy. Stay close." They approached the door carefully. Kate could feel her heartbeat in her chest, the anticipation growing as she slowly reached for the handle. Just as her fingers touched the cold metal, a movement caught her eye. In the window above, she could see a shadow. Someone was watching them. Someone who shouldn't be there. Robert Harrison, Kate muttered under her breath. The name echoed in her mind. She'd heard it before. Harrison was a local businessman with a reputation of well-to-do. Man with connections that went deep into the heart of the town. A man who could make problems disappear with the stroke of a pen, but today, none of that mattered. Today, he was about to face the consequences of his actions. With a steady breath, Kate kicked the door open. It creaked loudly as it swung wide, revealing the dimly lit interior. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and dust, as if the house had been abandoned for years. But it hadn't. Not completely. Inside, the sound of the child's sobs grew. Louder. "Stay here, Max," Kate whispered. Max obeyed, standing at the entrance with a fierce, alert gaze as Kate moved forward. Her steps were measured, the silence between them almost suffocating. She followed the sound of the crying, her heart pounding in her chest, in the back of the house. She found her Emily, a small girl, no older than 8, huddled in the corner of a dark room. Her face was dirty, her clothes ragged, but her eyes, bright, fearful, locked onto Kate's with a mixture of fear and hope. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now," Kate said softly, crouching down in front of the girl. But before she could make a move, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, heavy, deliberate. Robert Harrison. She could feel the anger radiating off of him before he even entered the room. "What are you doing here?" Harrison's voice was calm, controlled, as though he had done nothing wrong. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, Detective." Kate stood slowly, facing him. "I know exactly what I'm getting into, Mr. Harrison, and it's over." But before Harrison could respond, something unexpected happened. Max, who had been waiting in the doorway, suddenly lunged forward, his growl turning into a deep, menacing bark. Harrison flinched, stepping back in fear. Max was more than just a dog, he was a force of nature. At this moment, Kate knew they had to move fast. Harrison's facade was crumbling, and the truth was about to come out. But getting Emily out of the house and away from Harrison wouldn't be easy. There were more layers to this story, and Kate was determined to uncover them all. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe to the Brave Animals YouTube channel, where we share incredible stories of heroism, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between dogs and humans. Hit that subscribe button to never miss out on the journey ahead. The air outside felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. The mission was clear: get Emily to safety. But as Kate glanced at Harrison, she knew this was just the beginning. Someone with power and influence, wasn't going to go down without a fight. But Kate wasn't going to back down. She had a job to do, and with Max by her side, there was no way she was going to let him win. Kate sat quietly in her patrol car, the engine humming softly in the background as the events of the last few hours replayed in her mind. She had managed to get Emily out of the house, but the real challenge was still ahead. The girl's father, Robert Harrison, was a powerful man, someone whose influence reached far beyond the confines of this small town. No one would believe that he was capable of such monstrous acts, at least not without proof, and Kate didn't have the luxury of time to gather all the evidence she needed. Max, her ever-loyal canine partner, sat at attention beside her in the front seat. His eyes were sharp, his body rigid with the anticipation of what was to come. She couldn't help but smile at him. He had always been her rock in moments like this. As much as she liked to think of herself as tough and unflappable, there were times when the weight of the job could feel unbearable. That's when Max's calm presence would pull her back from the brink. "We're going to need backup," Kate muttered under her breath, her fingers tapping against the steering wheel. She glanced at the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of Emily's small form in the back seat. The girl had finally fallen silent, exhausted from the trauma she had endured. Kate's heart ached at the sight, but she knew she couldn't let her guard down. Not yet. Emily's wide eyes had haunted her since their first encounter. They were filled with a mix of fear, confusion, and something darker, something Kate couldn't quite put into words. It was as though the little girl had already learned how to survive a world that was bent on breaking her. That kind of strength was rare, especially in someone so young, but it was also dangerous. If Harrison suspected that Emily was trying to escape, there was no telling what he might do to get her back. As Kate set her jaw, a plan began to form. She needed to get Emily somewhere safe, somewhere far from Harrison's reach, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, and that help came in the form of Ethan Stone. Ethan wasn't just any millionaire. He was a man with connections, resources, and a deep commitment to children's welfare. He had made a name for himself in the community by funding various charities and causes, always striving to make a difference in the lives of those who had been abandoned or hurt by the system. But even more than that, Ethan had a personal stake. In this, his younger sister had gone missing years ago, and the pain of that loss had never left him. He knew what it felt like to lose a child, and he wasn't about to let another one fall through the cracks. Kate had called him earlier that day, explaining the situation and asking for his help. Ethan had agreed without hesitation. His first words to her had been simple, but loaded with meaning. "You've got my support. Let's get her out of there." Now, as she sat in the car, waiting for Ethan's team to arrive, Kate couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency creeping over. Her time was running out. Harrison was smart, and he was dangerous. If he found out that Emily had escaped, there would be no telling how far he would go to silence her. Kate couldn't let that happen. Not after everything Emily had been through. Max seemed to sense the rising tension in the air. He let out a low growl, his muscles coiled and ready to spring into action. Kate reached down and patted him gently on the head, her voice soft but firm. "Stay focused, boy. We've got work to do." It wasn't long before Ethan arrived, his sleek black SUV pulling up next to Kate's car. He stepped out, tall and imposing, dressed in his usual sharp suit. Despite the wealth and power he carried with him, there was a kindness in his eyes, something that set him apart from the other men in his social circle. Kate trusted him, and that trust was something she didn't offer lightly. "Kate," Ethan said, his voice calm but laced with concern. "How's she holding up? Kate nodded toward the back seat. She's been through a lot. I'm trying to keep her calm, but it's hard. She's barely said a word since we left. Ethan leaned against the car, glancing at Emily's small, fragile form. Poor kid. I can't imagine what she's been through. We'll get her somewhere. Safe, Kate said firmly, her eyes narrowing. But we need to move fast. Harrison's not going to let this go, is he? If we don't get her out of town, we might lose our window of opportunity. Ethan straightened up, his jaw tightening. What's the plan? Kate glanced around, her mind running through the options. She had a few ideas, but none of them were perfect. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. They were dealing with a man who had resources, influence, and a history of getting away with things that no one should ever be able to sweep under the rug. The last thing they needed was to walk into a trap. We'll need to get Emily to a secure location, one that Harrison doesn't know about, Kate said. I've got a safe house upstate we can use, but it's not far enough away. We'll need a distraction away to keep Harrison from tracing us before we can get her to safety. Ethan thought for a moment, his eyes scanning the surroundings. I know just the place. A remote cabin I use when I need to get away. It's off the grid. No one knows about it. We can lay low there until we figure out our next move. Kate hesitated. And what about Harrison? We'll deal with him, Ethan replied, his voice hardening. We're not letting him get away with this. As they drove toward the cabin, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time they passed a car or a house, her mind raced with possibilities. Could Harrison have eyes on them? Had he somehow found out they were leaving? Max sat quietly in the back seat, his ears pricked for any sign of danger. The tension was palpable, but Kate remained focused. They were close now, so close to getting Emily out of harm's way. But the closer they got, the more she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Harrison wasn't just a criminal, he was a predator, and if they weren't careful, they could all become prey. Almost there, Kate muttered to herself, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. She glanced at Ethan, who was staring out the window, his expression unreadable. She knew he was thinking about his sister, the loss that had haunted him for so long. And now, Emily had become his responsibility. Too, we won't let him hurt her, Kate said, as much to herself as to Ethan. Not if I can help it. Ethan gave her a brief nod, his eyes steely with resolve. We'll make sure of it. The cabin was quiet, tucked away deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to swallow the world in silence. It was perfect. Too perfect. But Kate couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Every shadow seemed a little darker, every creak of the wooden floor a little too loud. Max sat beside her, his sharp eyes scanning the trees outside as he lay on his bed in the corner of the small, rustic room. Ethan was just finishing up with the phone call, his voice low and steady as he spoke with one of his private security contacts. He had set up a perimeter around the cabin, made sure no one could get in without being detected. But as Kate stood at the window, looking out at the isolation that surrounded them, she couldn't stop wondering, would it be enough? Max growled softly, breaking her concentration. She turned just in time to see the dog's head tilt toward the door, ears perked up. Someone was coming. Stay here, Max, she whispered as she quietly moved toward the door. It wasn't just a hunch this time, something was definitely off. Who's out there? She asked, her voice low, eyes flicking over to Ethan, who was just ending his call. Ethan raised an eyebrow, looking up from the phone. What do you mean? I don't know. It's hard to explain. She moved closer to the door, pausing. Just behind it, it's just ... a feeling. He didn't question her. Ethan knew better than to dismiss her instincts. He stood up and quietly walked over to the back window, peering out into the dark forest. Kate felt the familiar pang of adrenaline flood her system. It wasn't a feeling she liked to rely on, but it had never steered her wrong before. It's probably nothing, Ethan said after a moment, though his voice didn't carry much certainty. But we'll keep an eye out. Kate nodded. She had always been good at spotting danger before it appeared, and in this case, it felt close. The night dragged on, the minutes stretching long and tense. Kate couldn't sleep, even though she had to. Ethan was the same way, sitting up late into the night, flipping through the records he'd brought with him. Every file he opened seemed to add another layer to the mystery surrounding Robert Harrison. They'd learned more about the man since their first encounter about his business dealings, his wealth, his connections to some of the most powerful families in the country. The things people didn't say were the most damning part of it all. It wasn't just that Harrison was a dangerous man. It was that he had the means to erase his tracks, to bury the truth, and to make things disappear like his daughter. Just like every secret he needed, hidden. Kate found herself pacing by the window, unable to rest. Emily was asleep in the other room, a small bundle of exhaustion and fear. Kate's mind kept returning to the girl's haunting eyes-the look that said she had seen too much, that she knew things no child should know. Emily's silence spoke volumes. Whatever she had endured at her father's hands, it had changed her in ways Kate wasn't sure she could understand. The little girl had grown up too quickly. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a soft knock at the door. Max growled low again, and Kate's heart skipped a beat. "It's me, Ethan," called out, voice muffled behind the door. "You're going to want to see this." Kate's gut twisted. She opened the door cautiously, expecting something small, maybe an update from one of Ethan's security team members. Instead, she found Ethan standing there, a grim expression. On his face, in his hand, was a small file, a folder she hadn't seen before. "Where'd you get that?" she asked, her voice low. "I did some digging," he replied, handing her the file. "We missed something big." Kate flipped. It opened, the words jumping out at her. It was a list of names, high-profile names, the kind of people you saw in the headlines, but never expected to be involved in something so sordid. The list of Harrison's associates was longer than she had anticipated, and it wasn't just about money. These were people with power, people who could make entire families disappear. And it looked like Harrison had been working with them for years. "What is this?" Kate whispered, her heart racing. "These names are connected to something bigger than we thought," Ethan said. "Harrison isn't just an abuser. He's part of a network of people who exploit vulnerable children." Kate's stomach turned. She had suspected there was more to the story, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. This was organized, cold, calculated. "There's a child trafficking ring," Ethan continued, "and Harrison's involved. Not just as a buyer, but as a supplier." Kate sat down hard on the nearest chair, the file trembling in her hands. She hadn't expected this level of corruption. The realization that this was bigger than just one family, the realization that this was a network that reached beyond their small town, hit her like a ton of bricks. "And Emily," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "she's been part of this, a pawn in whatever sick game they're playing. We need to get her out of here, and we need to expose all of this," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the shock that had clearly set in. "But we can't do it alone. We need help." Kate nodded, her mind racing. This wasn't just about keeping Emily safe anymore. It was about stopping a massive, powerful network. It was about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. "We'll need to move her again," Kate said, determination settling over her. "And we'll need to move fast." Ethan looked at her, his eyes dark with resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes. We'll protect her." The next morning, the plan was set in motion. They couldn't trust anyone else. Not yet, not when the stakes were this high. The only ones who could help were the people who had already committed to the cause: Kate, Ethan, and Max, as they packed up and prepared to leave. Kate couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were about to face. Harrison was a dangerous man, but this was bigger. They were going up against a network of people who had lived in the shadows for far too long. If they were going to take them down, they had to stay one step ahead. Max sat by the door, his watchful eyes scanning the area. Kate knew that no matter what happened next, they would get through it together. The air felt different as they drove away from the cabin. The trees that once seemed comforting now appeared menacing, their branches swaying in the wind like they were watching, whispering secrets they weren't ready to share. Kate's grip tightened on the steering wheel, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror every few seconds. The weight of what they had uncovered hung heavily in the air. The plan had shifted. What they had thought was a rescue mission had turned into something much darker. And yet, as the miles ticked by, Kate felt the adrenaline surge through her veins. There was no turning back now. Max lay quietly in the back seat, his dark eyes watching her intently. He could sense her unease, but he trusted her. He had always trusted her. They'd been through too much together for him to falter now. Still, the tension between them was palpable. The silence that stretched between Kate and Ethan was thick with unspoken thoughts, each of them grappling with the truth they'd uncovered. "I still can't believe it," Kate muttered, breaking the silence. "I thought we were just dealing with an abusive father. But this, ... Ethan turned to her, his face hardening as he processed what they had learned. "This is bigger than we imagined. Those names in the file, they're connected to people who've been getting away with this for years. The whole town, hell, the whole state, has been blind to it. But now we know, and now we have to do something about it." "I know," Kate replied, her voice tight, "but we don't have the luxury of time. Every minute we waste puts Emily in more danger. We need to move her to a new location, somewhere even more secure, and we need to make sure we have enough evidence to expose these people. If we don't, if we fail, Emily won't be the only one who suffers." Ethan nodded. "I've been thinking about that. We can't go public with this yet, not without solid proof. But we can start tracking down some of these names. I've got a few contacts that might be able to help us dig deeper, but they're risky. If Harrison has any idea we're onto him, he could shut us down before we even get started." Kate's mind raced as she considered their options. There was no way they could handle this on their own. The stakes were too high. But getting help meant exposing themselves to even greater danger. And they didn't have much of a choice. "We'll take the risk," Kate said, determination in her voice. "We can't do this half-heartedly. We either go all in or we walk away. And walking away is not an option." As they drove on, the landscape began to shift. The dense woods gave way to rolling hills and small farms, each one seemingly more peaceful than the last, but Kate couldn't help but feel the calm before the storm. She had seen too many cases like this, the small towns that looked safe on the outside but hid darkness beneath their peaceful facades, the predators who blended in, disguised by their wealth and charm, using their influence to control everything and everyone around them. When they finally reached the safe house, the weight of the day began to settle in. It was a small, unassuming place, tucked away on the outskirts of town, a perfect hiding spot for Emily. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. They couldn't hide her forever. Harrison would come for her, and if they weren't ready, they would. Lose her. Emily had barely spoken since they arrived. She had kept to herself, curling up in a corner with a blanket pulled tightly around her. Kate had tried to talk to her, but the little girl seemed to retreat even further into herself. She was too scared to trust anyone, too damaged by everything she had experienced. Kate's heart ached at the thought. No child should ever have to live through something like this. "Hey, Kate." Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. "I've got something. A lead on one of the names from the list." Kate's pulse quickened as she stood up, moving toward him. "What do you have? I've been going through some of the connections." Harrison has his business partners, people in his inner circle. One name stood out to Amelia McAllister. He's a major player in the city's real estate market, but his name's been popping up in some darker circles recently. I think he's the key to unraveling this whole thing. Kate felt a knot form in her stomach. "What makes you think McAllister's involved?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "He's been part of a few shell companies that Harrison's been using. To cover up his tracks, McAllister's got money, but he's also got a lot to hide. I think he's been working with Harrison on some of these ... business ventures, and I don't think he's going to stop until Harrison's completely out of the picture." "So, McAllister's not just a bystander," Kate said, already piecing things together. "He's an active participant. That's a problem." "Yeah, it is," Ethan said. "But it's also an opportunity. If we can get to McAllister, we can get to Harrison. We can make them both pay for what they've done." Kate's mind spun. She could feel the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. McAllister was the connection they needed, the key to cracking this case wide open. But getting to him wouldn't be easy, not with everything on the line. "We're going to need a plan," Kate said, pacing back and forth. "We can't just walk into McAllister's office and expect him to give us the answers. We'll need to be smart, strategic. We need leverage." Ethan smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I've got a few ideas." The next few days were a blur of preparation and planning. Kate and Ethan worked together, poring over every scrap of information they could find on McAllister and his associates. They were careful, taking every precaution to cover their tracks. But even with their best efforts, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She had no proof, no concrete evidence, but every time she left the safe house, her gut told her something wasn't right. And then, one evening, as she was preparing to meet with one of Ethan's contacts, the feeling grew stronger. She turned. To Max, who had been unusually quiet all day, he stood at the door, ears perked, staring intently at something outside. Max growled low in his throat. Kate's pulse spiked. "I think we've been made," she whispered. Kate had seen fear before, but this was different. The cold knot in her stomach grew tighter as she looked over at Ethan, who was silently scanning the perimeter of their makeshift safe house. His jaw was clenched, and the ever-present calm in his demeanor had started to falter. For the past few days, they'd been moving Emily from one safe location to another, always on edge, constantly checking their backs. They'd made progress tracking down the names from the list and getting closer to McAllister, but something had changed. The walls were closing in on them, and the risks were mounting by the hour. The longer they stayed on the run, the more it became clear Harrison wasn't going to let them take Emily from him. He wasn't going to let anyone destroy his empire. Max, Kate's ever-reliable K9, stood by her side as they continued to monitor the house. The dog's sense of danger was far sharper than anyone's. He could tell when something wasn't right. And right now, Max was on edge. His ears were perked, and his eyes darted around the room. Kate's gut told her they weren't alone. "We need to get moving," she said to Ethan, her voice low but urgent. She grabbed her jacket, motioning toward the door. "Harrison's on our tail. He knows where we are. We don't have much time." Ethan hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Are you sure?" Kate didn't hesitate. "I'm sure. Max is picking up on something, and we can't afford to wait and find out if we're right." Without another word, Ethan grabbed his bag, and they made their way outside. The sky had darkened by now, the sun sinking lower behind the hills. The woods around them were silent, too silent for Kate's comfort. Something was off. Kate led the way, keeping Max on her right as they crossed the dirt path toward the edge of the property. As they reached the wooded area behind the house, a low growl rumbled in Max's throat. Kate stopped, motioning for Ethan to stay quiet. She listened intently, but the night air remained still, and then it happened. The sound of a vehicle's engine rumbled from the road just beyond the trees. The headlights cut through the darkness, slicing through the shadows like a knife. Kate's breath caught in her throat. "He's here," she whispered, more to herself than to Ethan. They were running out of time. The truck screeched to a halt just a few hundred yards away, and the sound of doors slamming shut echoed through the night. Kate's heart raced as she motioned for Ethan to follow her. They needed to get Emily out of here, now. They had spent so much time on the move, trying to stay ahead of Harrison's every move. The whole time Kate had been calculating, thinking about what could happen if they ever got too close to the truth. But now she realized just how much trouble they were in. Harrison had more resources than she'd ever imagined. "I'll lead them away," Kate said, her voice steady, even though the anxiety clawed at her insides. "You take Emily to the backup location. I'll meet you there." Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm not leaving you. We need to stick together." Kate felt her heart skip a beat, but there was no time to argue. She had to make sure Emily was safe, even if it meant taking the most dangerous route herself. "I'll be fine," she said, forcing herself to sound confident. I can handle it. Just get her out of here." Ethan reluctantly nodded, and they split up Kate, heading deeper into the trees to distract Harrison's men. While Ethan and Emily made their way toward the old cabin they had arranged as a fallback plan, Kate kept her movements quiet, slipping through the brush, her breath steady and her steps calculated. Max trotted beside her, his ears alert, his nose picking up every scent in the air. They could hear voices now, closer. Harrison's men were on the move. "They're right behind us," Kate muttered to Max, though she knew he could hear them too. The adrenaline was pumping through her veins, and she felt a surge of determination. She had come too far to let them get Emily now. Meanwhile, Ethan and Emily were making their way toward the cabin. But Kate couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They had a plan, but plans never survived contact with reality. And this felt like a setup. Just as she ducked behind a large tree to catch her breath, a flash of light from the corner of her eye made her freeze. She held her breath as Two figures emerged from the tree line. Harrison's men. Kate's heart pounded in her chest. She'd hoped to avoid them, but it was too late now. Max let out a low growl, and Kate's pulse quickened. The first man stepped forward, gun raised. He said with a grin. Kate didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she pulled out her own weapon, pointing it straight at the man's chest. The second man hesitated, his hand twitching near his holster. "You're making a big mistake," Kate said, her voice cold and unwavering. "Back off, or this ends right here." The men exchanged a look, but neither of them moved. Kate's finger tightened on the trigger, her stance steady as she assessed the situation. Suddenly, charging at the first man with incredible speed, Kate reacted instantly, her shot ringing out just as Max knocked the first man to the ground. The second man lunged toward her, but she was quicker. She dropped him in one swift move, his body collapsing to the ground with a dull thud. Moment, there was silence. The adrenaline in Kate's veins began to ebb, and she realized that she had done itchy, had neutralized the threat. But it wasn't over. Max stood over the two unconscious men, panting, his fur matted with sweat. Kate patted him gently, her heart still racing. "You did good, boy," she said, her voice soft just then. A noise came from behind them, a car door slamming shut. Kate's heart stopped. It was Harrison, she cursed under her breath. There was no more time to waste. Kate ran toward the cabin, hoping to catch up to Ethan and Emily before Harrison could. The air was thick with tension as she darted through the trees, her mind racing. She couldn't fail now. She couldn't let Harrison take Emily, not after everything they'd been through, not when they were so close to ending it all. As she reached the clearing, she spotted Ethan and Emily by the cabin, but Harrison wasn't far behind. This was it. The final showdown. Kate's breath was ragged as she crouched behind the old stone wall, watching Harrison's men approach. The situation had escalated faster than she'd anticipated. After the tense standoff in the woods, it felt like everything had gone into overdrive. But she couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. The stakes had never been higher, and Emily's life was on the line. The cabin was close, too close. Ethan and Emily were there, and Kate needed to make sure they stayed safe. She had to get rid of the remaining threats and make sure Harrison couldn't track them down. Max was by her side, his breathing steady. As he waited for her next move, the loyal canine was always calm under pressure. And right now, that calmness felt like the only thing tethering Kate to reality. She had no illusions about what they were up against. Harrison wasn't just any criminal. He had power, influence, and he had a reputation for making people disappear. If they didn't act fast, there was a very real chance Emily would vanish, just like his other victims. Kate adjusted her grip on her weapon, her mind running through the plan one last time. She had to take down Harrison's men. It was the only way. But she knew Harrison himself wouldn't be far behind. He wouldn't let them escape so easily. The silence of the forest around her felt suffocating as she watched the men move closer, their voices muffled by the distance. The air was thick with anticipation, and Kate felt her muscles tense as she prepared to make her move. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a twig breaking underfoot made her freeze. The men had heard it too. One of them turned sharply, the dark woods. He was about to speak when Max lunged forward, a blur of fur and muscle. Kate didn't hesitate. She moved to her feet, silent against the soft earth, as she closed the gap between her and the men. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took aim, her focus narrowing to just the target in front of her. Bang! The first shot rang out, striking the man who had been closest to her. He collapsed without a sound, his body hitting the ground with a thud. The other two men spun around in surprise, reaching for their weapons. But it was too late. Max was already on them, a fierce protector, and Kate was right behind him. Another shot, another man down. The final one was slower, a little too late to react, and Kate didn't give him a chance to draw his weapon. With a quick motion, she had him on the ground, cuffed and neutralized. Her pulse was still racing, but there was no time to relax. She couldn't afford to feel relief yet. Harrison was still out there, and he would come for them. They had no more time to waste. Kate made her way to the cabin, her breath finally slowing. She pushed open the door, stepping into the dimly lit room where Ethan and Emily were waiting. The sight of the little girl, her eyes wide with fear, broke Kate's heart all over again. Ethan stood up immediately, his eyes searching hers. "You're okay," he said, relief in his voice, but his face was tight with concern. "Are they? They're down," Kate replied, glancing over her shoulder as she made her way further inside. "But Harrison's still out there. We need to go now." Ethan nodded, grabbing Emily's hand gently. He looked down at her, his face softening with the kind of tenderness that had been absent from Emily's life for too long. "You're safe now. We're getting you out of here." Kate could see the tension still hanging in the air. Ethan's worry for Emily was palpable. But it wasn't just about keeping her safe from Harrison anymore. This was about putting an end to everything, exposing the people behind it all, making sure no one else had to go through what Emily had endured. Kate glanced back toward the door. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice firm. "Harrison will come for us. He won't stop until we're all dead, or he's got Emily back." Ethan's face hardened. He knew this wasn't just about running anymore. They had to finish it. They had to take down Harrison once and for all. "You're right," he said, his voice determined. "Let's finish this." They spent the next several hours in motion. They couldn't risk staying in one place too long. With Emily in tow, they moved quickly, navigating the dark, winding roads as fast as they could without drawing too much attention. They needed to get to the one person who could help them take down Harrison and his whole network, a trusted ally of Ethan's, who had connections deep enough to reach into the places Harrison had tried so hard to bury. As they drove, Kate couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Emily had been through so much, too much. She had seen things no child should ever witness. Kate knew it wasn't just about the physical scars. The emotional ones ran deeper, and those would take years to heal, if they ever did at all. But they were going to give Emily a chance at a life without fear, a chance at a future. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly as he drove, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "For everything," Kate nodded, her eyes on Emily in the rearview mirror. "We're not done yet," she said, the weight of the next step pressing down on her. "But we will be." It was hours before they reached the ally who would help them bring Harrison down. The safe house wasn't just a place to hide. It was their next move in exposing everything that had been hidden. They couldn't stop now. The next step was dangerous, but it was necessary. Once inside, Ethan wasted no time pulling out the files. All the evidence they had gathered over the past week. They would go to the authorities with everything, exposing Harrison and his criminal network. But they couldn't just hand it off. They needed to be sure that Harrison's men wouldn't erase everything they had worked for. This time, they had to be smarter. They had to hit them where it hurt. "Once this gets out," Kate said, watching the plans unfold before them, "Harrison's done. But we need to move quickly. This is our chance." Ethan nodded, his eyes fierce. "We're not stopping until he's behind bars." And finally, after everything, after all the danger, the betrayals, and the long nights of fear and uncertainty, Kate believed him. They were going to take Harrison down, and they were going to do it for Emily. Thank you for following this journey. What would you do if you were in Kate's shoes? How far would you go to protect someone who had been hurt by those in power? Share your thoughts below.